right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to give us a few minutes because we are moving from Facebook Live, what we had planned to stream, to YouTube. So hopefully, all right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I should not have YouTube up while we are streaming so we don't have the echo. Okay, so we are streaming on YouTube Live. Hopefully everyone has joined us from Facebook, and we are going to be sharing this link on Twitter as well. My name is Stephanie Drinka. I am the Communications Director for Dallas Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. Our mission is to create a radically inclusive city by addressing race and racism through narrative change, relationship building, and equitable policies and practices. Transformation Tuesday is our community-driven online series that we started during the pandemic, and it's to examine the ways racism and race impact every aspect of our daily lives, and also discuss what we can do as a community to change and transform it. I'm excited today because we have a very important topic: museum educators and art administrators. And this panel has been curated very intentionally by our Manager of Partnerships and Transformation, Ms. Marta Torres, who is zooming in from Puerto Rico. In addition to being our Manager of Partnerships and Transformation, she also has a career in museum education and has created educational content for all ages in various esteemed institutions in DFW. Also joining us is Asami Robledo Allen Yamamoto, who is a Mexican-American museum educator, currently serving as the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. We have with us Teresa Coleman-Wash, a producer, writer, and founding artistic director for the Bishop Arts Theater Center, who is also one of our Racial Equity Now cohort members last year. Their mission is to cultivate a diverse and vibrant arts community while creating opportunities for local and emerging artists through performance and education. We also have Jessica Fuentes, an artist, educator, and community advocate and museum consultant. She's worked at the Dallas Museum of Art and the Amon Carter Museum of American Art and is currently a freelance museum consultant. She is also going to give us some background and information to set up this conversation and what brings us here today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for her. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So I just wanted to kind of talk through a little bit of data regarding demographics in the field of art museum education. So to start, this is data from a survey that was done in 2015 and funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And this is just, part of the demographic data that they provided in their report. So to me, this is something that I've seen in the museum world, and I think anyone who's worked in museums, this will come as no surprise, but it's important to kind of look at the breakdown of demographics in museum fields. So starting, we can stay here for just a second. So starting on the far left of this graph, you can see that in security and facilities positions, it's a pretty equal representation of people of color who fill these roles and people who identify as white. But then when you look at positions related to conservation, curatorial, education, and leadership, it's a dramatic shift. So if we can go to the next slide. So the Mellon Foundation did a follow-up survey a few years later, and this is some information from that survey. So you can see that there are definitely some gains being made within the couple of years between these surveys. I think perhaps education is the place where the most gains were made within, hiring people of color into these fields. But overall, it's still really unequitable, and it's not a representation of the population of our country. So from here, I put together a survey that I wanted to get a better sense of not just museum educators, but specifically museum educators who are leading K through 12 tours. So you may already know this, but our K through 12 demographics in this country are already majority minority students. So we are, I think, at 55% students of color who make up our K through 12 population. So what I did for this survey, like I said, is I was investigating demographics around the museum educators who lead tours for that age group. And this map just kind of shows the different museums that participated in the survey. So you can kind of see it's a good, well, it's a relatively good representation across the United States. Of course, there are some holes where we didn't collect data, but I'm hoping in the future to expand the survey and to get more information from all states. Next slide. And then also you can see here that most of the museums that participated in my survey were art museums. So that obviously has to do with the fact that I'm an art museum educator, and that's kind of where my circles are. But again, kind of moving forward, my hope is to expand the survey and to also reach out to more institutions like history museums, children's museums, science museums, and things like that. This was interesting to me, the types of educators from these participating museums. This is like the most equal kind of representation, where about a third of these educators are paid gallery teachers or paid educators. About a third are docents or unpaid. And then about a third of the institutions had a little bit of both, making up the people who led these tours. So this is kind of an overview of some of the data that I collected. So you can see there are 29 participating institutions. And as you kind of look across these graphs, it's very clear that a majority of these institutions, a majority of the educators who lead their tours identify as white. The one kind of outlier is institution number 29 here, that has a majority of educators who identify as Black or African American, and that institution was actually an African American history museum. So again, this is really similar to the kind of data that we found at that Andrew Mellon Foundation demographics, but this is specific for tour guides in these museums. So next slide. So here I gathered demographic data for children under age 18 in the corresponding counties of those 29 institutions. So you can see that across the board, each of these counties is much more diverse than the people who are leading these tours at the museums. So there's no correlation whatsoever between the demographics of the county and the demographics of the staff. And I thought this was really illuminating. Again, as someone who's been in art museums, it's something that I've seen and known, and I know anecdotally, but it was really helpful to kind of put this data together and have something to present to others to illustrate the issues here. So that's kind of what I wanted to share, just to kind of kick us off.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was, I mean, not surprising, but also to see it sort of just illustrated right in front of our faces like that. Clearly, we have a lot of work to do. So on that note, I'd love to hear from each panelist how the arts administration and museum education community has responded in the past to racism in Dallas-Fort Worth and to race and racism as a whole. So anyone can start. Teresa, if you want to start.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. As you know, my background is in theater, and Jessica, the information that you shared really resonated with me deeply, because I also did some research on how leadership, what leadership looks like for women of color in our sector. And it's interesting that the statistics were pretty much the same. So I moved to Dallas in January of 2000. And in 2005, we had the good fortune of having a 10,000 square foot building donated to our nonprofit. We raised $500,000 in private sector funding. We were able to get a construction loan for another $500,000, about $700,000 actually, and started the renovations on this dilapidated property on Tyler Street back in 2006 and completed the renovations in 2008. And so we were courting a lot of the foundations in the philanthropic community here in Dallas. And I was incredibly naive, thought that we would have the naming rights that many of the arts institutions in the downtown area would. I felt like we could attract that interest. And to my surprise at that time, it was really incredibly hard. What we know from Dallas TRHT is Dallas is ranked dead last in economic inclusivity. And also, we have some of the largest segregated schools in the Dallas area. Interestingly enough, the building that was erected in 1917 that we occupy here was a silent movie house. And I can't prove this, but in my spirit, I feel like one of those films that was shown here was Birth of a Nation. I do. So it's not lost on me that almost 100 years later, this Black woman is running this institution and responsible for the narratives that are being shaped and disseminated out in the world. Also, in the 1920s, Dallas had the largest KKK chapter in the country. Last year, a Dallas-based organization was responsible for 80% of racist, anti-Semitic, and other hateful messages tracked in the United States. So there's a mindset here. And I think we have some really unique challenges in Dallas. The human pathogens of hatred and tribalism from the 1920s never went away.
That's real. Thank you, Teresa. That the statistic about the Ku Klux Klan membership in Dallas being 1 in 3 eligible men, and people just assuming that dies off after the generations, but it's just passed down.
Absolutely. And I think we can see that in so many of the systemic structures that are built here in the Dallas area. I'm hopeful, I'm cautiously optimistic that that's changing. I mean, the fact that Dallas TRHT is flourishing as well as you are, and it is really a hopeful sign to me. But in order for us to really create a radical, inclusive city, we have to, these are the conversations I think that we have to continue to have.
Absolutely. I'm speaking of structures. I'm very curious because I'm not really familiar with the museum space. Asami and Jessica, how has race and racism impacted you and your organizations and institutions in the museum space?
I can start, Asami. So when Teresa was talking about segregation in Dallas, that really kind of echoes obviously what we're seeing in Fort Worth, segregation in the school system. And again, as a museum educator, kind of everything that I think about for my community goes back also to what's happening in the public school system. There's a great PhD dissertation by a TCU student, and I'm forgetting their name at the moment, who really kind of unpacked the segregation and desegregation of Fort Worth ISD. The dissertation is called Cowtown and the Color Line, if anyone wants to look it up. But I think it's so important for museum educators to really understand the history of the city that they're in, because racism didn't just start yesterday. It is built in and has been kind of festering over time, and everything that's happening now is a shadow of what's happened before. And without understanding that history, we can't really start to tackle anything. But I will say that in the museum world, museum educators are definitely the people who are usually pushing forward, who are seeing these issues, who are working closely with the community, and who want to make change happen. Now, they're not always the people who have the power to make that change happen, but they are doing a lot of work to try to make it happen.
It's
really hard to follow up with that. So I think museums are, I've always heard that museums are like the slowest to make changes because it's such a huge institution. And, you know, it's always ironic to me that museums are cultural institutions that tell the culture through a Western lens instead of through the lens of the actual culture that they're portraying. But I think slowly, like Jessica said, museum educators are starting to maybe implement more CRT into their lesson plans and really almost providing an avenue for counter narratives for students to really take more control of the conversation in order to find more representation in the museums. It's slow, but I think it's starting from down up, and hopefully we'll start to see some of those changes reflected in the board one day.
Yeah, that actually leads me to my next question. Marta, you've worked in a number of spaces in the nonprofit world, in the museum world. What do you think, how could racial equity make a difference within a board of directors or leadership in museums and art institutions?
Oh, well, it can make such a difference, right? The fact is, in my experience, right, I've walked into a board member meeting to present my education report for the year and what we've done in programming, right? And I walked in and it's one predominantly men, and then it's white men who are decades older than I am. And then I'm trying to defend to them the programming that we've done, why it's important that we continue to expand it, that we continue to diversify, hire people for roles that are people of color, because we're going into communities of people of color so they can it's not even seeing themselves, it's just bringing different perspectives. So just the fact of bringing racial equity to a board, to a museum board, I think would be one of the most transformational things museums can do, because then everything trickles from the top, right? And in museums, it's very hierarchical. It's very much a structure of hierarchy. So if the board is diverse, that continues to trickle down. If there's more of a racial equitable balance and that racial hierarchy is erased, then true change can be effective throughout the whole museum departments, and I'm talking museum wide. So I think that's probably the most important thing that a museum board or museums could do, is diversify their board, just bring people who represent different cultures and different perspectives and just people of color. Because I don't know how many times I walked into a boardroom and it was just me. And then I was a woman of color. So that's just another whole connotation to it. So I think that's the most important thing museums could actually do. One of the most important steps museums could take.
I'll just add, like I was saying, a lot of the push for racial justice and equity has been coming historically from museum education over the last decades. And there is only so much that can happen when it's coming, from below and trying to work its way up through the hierarchy. So to echo what Marta has said, having a diverse board is so essential, not just for bringing in different perspectives and opinions, but for affecting change, because that's really where decisions are made.
I completely agree. I think to have diversity in thought is, quite frankly, a superpower, for board members. I'm reading this book called Think Again. And one of the things that the book, I'll just read some of the preface from you. It says, we listen to opinions that make us feel good instead of ideas that make us think hard. We see disagreements as a threat to our egos rather than an opportunity to learn. We surround ourselves with people who agree with our conclusions when we should be gravitating toward those who challenge our thought process. And to me, that's what a really successful, effective board looks like. One, I think it's really important to train the next generation of leaders, but also I think an intergenerational structure where some of the more our senior members who don't look like us bring ideas to the table can be, we can, young leaders who don't know what they don't know, and the more experienced leaders, of course, have that wisdom, that convergence, I think it's really helpful for board structures. Emma Rogers is our board chair. She had a successful business for about 30 years. She ran Black Images Books, a staple in the community, someone who has the wisdom that, so when we're all tripping over ourselves, she's like, listen, let me tell you, this is what you need to look out for. And quite frankly, I think it's been a feather. She's certainly been a feather in our cap. So having, that intergenerational convergence of diversity of thought, I think is one of our superpowers for our board of directors, for sure.
Thanks, Teresa. I'm curious, from your different institutions and the work that you're doing now, how has this time, the pandemic, the reckoning with racism, the election, obviously it's different for so many of us. What has your organization done to adapt, or what are their future plans? What kind of changes has this brought about?
I can start. So I'm relatively new at my institution, but I will say in my past institution, I was excited to see some of the DEAI initiatives start. There's unfortunately still very, very slow. They need to be sped up, but I was excited to hear that they were actually hearing from people in the community and seeing where the institution had maybe not been so strong. But with that said, again, I really just have to reiterate how slow it is from actually having these town halls to hearing employees talk, and the action being slow. It's still damaging to people of color on staff.
Well, and I won't speak specifically to an organization, but I'll just kind of speak maybe a little bit about my own experience. I think for me, going through the pandemic and this kind of racial reckoning has really made me more impatient for change. Like, I really want to see change now. I've been an educator for 14 years. I worked in museums for 10 years, and it's really just kind of sparked that in me that, if an organization isn't already where I need them to be, then I just cannot dedicate my time there anymore. So for me personally, I think it sparked a lot of change, and what I'm seeking, what I'm willing to kind of deal with, and what I want for myself now and for the future.
Kind of to echo on what Jessica's saying, right? I also left the museum field as for a similar reason. And whenever I would speak to colleagues and they would ask, of course, me the question of what can we do? And it's a question of, well, the work has already been written. The books have been written, the work has been done, the foundations have been in place for quite a few years now. It is not up to me anymore to try to explain to you what to do or the steps are to be racially equitable, and to make these moves in museum institutions. And this is speaking again from my experience, not any organization in particular. But yes, so my advice always to leadership in museums is to listen. Actually listen to what your people are telling you already, and then that's it. Don't expect them to be the ones being held accountable to affect the change. They've told you what you need, what they need. They told you what the steps should be. They've spoken clearly on what the requirements are. Now it's up to you to kind of do and facilitate the work and make the change happen. So that's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I just want to add also that, we're at an interesting crossroads of reimagining the entire sector. And what I'm finding is there is a commitment among the younger generation to really actualize the ideals that we have, that our ancestors fought, bled, and died for. That's really exciting for me. We started formed a BIPOC Arts Coalition during the pandemic with 3 other theater companies. And what's interesting is when the powers that be learned that we were talking to each other, everything changed. I mean, just the threat, it was a threat knowing that we were all talking to each other. And so I do think that there are some of us who are banking on not going back the way that things were. I think it's a function of our ego to invite culturally incompetent critics to shows for them to tell us that they like us. I'm not interested in going back to that. I'm not interested in having superficial conversations and relationships with people, quite frankly, who don't have a genuine interest in our well-being. We have never been a traditional theater company. We've always been community-based theater practitioners. And I feel like in this moment, that's such a strength. So we're leaning into that. We also decided to have really brave conversations with the philanthropic community, even at the risk of being ostracized. We know that women of color who run nonprofits receive 0.6% of philanthropic dollars anyway. So what do we have to lose? So we're showing up in ways that we haven't, and really engaging with folks to what Jessica and Marta has already said. We're not waiting for permission. We're not certainly not feeling victimized. We're taking matters in our own hands, and we're really just taking up space in ways that we haven't. And what's amazing that's happened is that we're being embraced, and we've seen, quite frankly, transformational change. So again, I'm cautiously optimistic, and but one thing is for sure, that it's not business as usual. We're not, going back to the structures that oppressed us prior to the pandemic.
So we know that racial equity is not diversity, that, more people of color in institutions is not going to create a more equitable system. And there's been damage and harm that's happened because of racism that can't be fixed with tokenization. What are some of the healing and reparations and transformations that need to happen in order to have a truly equitable cultural community, art institution community in Dallas? Marta, I'm going to let you start with that one, because you have a good view of both the transformation side and the arts side now.
So I'm all about practical and practicality, like things you can actually implement. And I've seen it with TRHT, DTRHT. We have a framework to kind of start tackling and going into these transformational changes and values. So for like cultural institutions and art institutions, I think what the first thing I mentioned was diversification of boards, which I think is so important. And not just diversification, but again, erasing that racial hierarchy, coming into a place where conversations and courageous spaces can be had, I think are so important. And we use courageous spaces. This is something I've learned with DTRHT. It's not a safe space, a courageous space, because we have to have brave conversations, and we have to be, we have to face some uncomfortable moments and uncomfortable feelings to kind of work through to reach those transformational changes. So that's the first thing I would say. Also, there's nothing, again, there's not a box you can check to say you've completed and you're now a racially equitable organization. That doesn't happen. There's not a step-by-step process. It's ongoing work. It's continuously checking in, checking for implicit bias, white cultural norms. And in cultural institutions, it's so important because you're serving communities that are, you know, embedded in history and rich traditions, and you need to be representative of that. So continuously going out into the communities, asking what the community needs, what your employees need, what the staff needs on every single level, I think is one of the most essential things cultural institutions need to do. And museums often do the demographic surveys. They do like analyze data and gather data to see who's coming to their institutions, but that's where it ends. They like to see the numbers, but then it doesn't go any forward to perpetuate true change. And again, this is from my past experience. I've brought up surveys, I've brought up demographic surveys, and okay, thank you so much. And it stays there. So actually take it and run with it, do some changes. That's what I think is what's needed for true transformational change and racial equity.
Yeah, and allyship can't be performative also. You know, it's not about, this isn't about who we are as artists or arts organization, arts administrators. It is about who we are as individuals. And it's certainly not about being on the right side of history also. And that's what I fear. I feel like people are professionalizing racial equity. So on the job, we're politically correct, but it really is, to Marta's point, an individual journey. Real social change is being proximate to the problem. And many of our organizations of color, as we know, are on the front lines with their communities, because we have to be. We certainly were not going to create the word that it escapes me. We were not going to create a situation where we were asking the community to buy a ticket for an event. You know, a transactional relationship. We were not going to create a transactional relationship during this time when our communities were in dire straits. And so I feel like we've got to be proximate again to the issues that are facing our community. In 2008, when the economy plummeted, I don't know if many of you remember that, but we received some of the best information that when I attended an art symposium, and that was, you know, now's the time to connect with your community. And so at that time, we held focus group meetings, and we came back to the theater, and what we learned was that parents wanted somewhere for their kids to be during the after school hours. Artists wanted somewhere to hone their craft, and some people in our community wanted a jazz series. And so when we came back to the community, to the theater, we knew that we had to be a neighborhood resource center, not just a place where people come to escape, to be entertained, but really to be a neighborhood resource center. And so I would say that we, you know, for arts organizations who are really interested in this work, the people across the street from you need to know who you are. You know, they need to know the work that you're doing. And personally, you've got to do the work personally. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint, and we're going to make mistakes. And we've got to be able to own up to those mistakes and also and do better and get back in the race.
I 100% agree with everything that has been said so far. And to that last point, I mean, one of the things I would love to see from arts organizations is also an acknowledgement of when they've misspoke, when they've, made the wrong decisions. Like, that's something that I feel many arts institutions want to just move forward, right? And start this kind of slow process to do work moving forward, but they don't want to take ownership over the mistakes that they have made to date. And that acknowledgement and real kind of apology and investment back into the communities, like, that is what is needed for me personally, for healing and to even start before that kind of work can start.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody. I think acknowledging of past errors is super important. For me personally, something that I would love to see is the including Spanish in all labels. So I'd love to walk into an institution and even, those messages that tell you how to wash your hands. Let's do that in Spanish too. I think that's part of being welcoming and being actually inclusive, is making sure that everybody understands well, obviously not everybody, but Spanish speakers, which make up a huge percentage of the Fort Worth population, can also understand what you're saying. I think that's a huge part. And that's a personal goal of mine. Every time that I come to an institution, I'd love to just raise the amount of Spanish that is offered.
Thank you all. I think Marta may have said it earlier, like, institutions really know what they need to do. It's sort of a matter of, are they willing to do it and when? But what can we as Dallas TRHT, as Dallas community members and sort of concerned citizens and partners do to support these institutions and the staff and the volunteers and sort of push this along from the outside? Is there advice that you would give people who want to help about how to show up in these spaces and conversations and really lean into this work to help?
I guess I can start. I'll just say, I guess the first step is getting to know the organizations that are here that have been doing the work, right? Speaking about Fort Worth, thinking about the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society that has been here doing this work, that knows the history of the communities here in Tarrant County. Support them, become a member, go to their virtual events, because not only are you supporting an incredible institution, but you're also learning and starting to do that work for yourself, going down that personal journey as well. So organizations like that, like Artes de la Rosa here in Fort Worth, are some that you can kind of start with as places to support. I don't know. Does anybody else want to jump in?
I would just say, don't wear your feelings on your sleeves. This is really hard work. I just want to be very clear. It's very hard work, and it's long and arduous, and we're going to make mistakes. When Asami was talking, I'm like, oh my God, we don't have a Spanish version of the hand washing signs in our bathrooms. And so, there are so many light bulb moments for me, and I'll be the first to admit that I have caused harm too, as a Black woman, because I feel like our minds have been so decolonized. And I distinctly remember going to a conference with the Dramatists Guild back in 2015 when I learned that about 22% of the stories on American theater stages are written by white men. I'm sorry, by women, for women of color, it was even dire. It was like 3%. And as a woman of color in a leadership position at a theater, I felt a huge responsibility and a conviction also that I didn't know that. So again, our minds are so decolonized. I really do feel like we've got to unlearn so much that we've kind of put out in the world. And so I would say to people who are willing to do and interested in doing this work is really don't wear your heart on your sleeves, because you are going to make mistakes. Acknowledge them. And as Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better.
I think another aspect of it is, and something I had to learn, and Jessica taught me a lot, was self-care. Taking moments to analyze situations that happened and caring about yourself before you care about other people. And I'm saying this maybe even like receiving it or someone doing a microaggression towards you, and you kind of taking a minute to take care of yourself first before thinking about, oh, well, what did I do to make this person feel that way? Kind of thinking about also, decolonizing your mind and stepping away from all the stuff that we're used to feeling like, oh, what did I do? And just thinking, okay, how do I take care of myself? Self-care is so difficult, and I think it's almost a trope now, but like it's just so important in order to be able to do the work. In order to continue educating, you need to take care of yourself first.
On the self-care note, we're getting into a place where we're getting a little bit more comfortable going back into the world. Is there, do you have a favorite either institution, museum, exhibit, or place or cultural spot in Dallas that is sort of like your refuge, or where you go for reflection and self-care that, you'd like to share with the audience?
I personally love Artes de la Rosa. They always have music. It's just a happy place to go, and for me, connect with my Latinidad and just get in touch with the community.
For me, it's I have a great group of friends who are artists and creators, and we get together. Through the pandemic, we're going to go to Zoom calls. We're all now ready to kind of come together in person. We're in that place. So we would go to someone's art studio and just make something and listen to music. And we're from across the board and from different nationalities and just different backgrounds. And it's just an amazing time to center ourselves. And we learn new mediums of painting, and we learn how to create different artworks and different mediums. It's really soothing. And my friend Iris Candelaria and Ofelia Faz Garza, who does the Semillitas book club, are kind of the women who spearhead getting us together. So I'm very grateful to them, and they do great work for the communities as well. So that's kind of my safe place. Plus DTRHT.
Another place in Fort Worth that I like to go with my family is the Fort Worth Community Arts Center. When there's not an opening or something, art centers can be pretty low engagement, which is nice because there's not a lot of other people there. We can go with our mask, we can take our time, and it's really an opportunity to kind of touch base with community and local artists, regional artists, and what they're producing, what's important to them, and to see those kinds of ideas, and to share it with our kids. I have a toddler and a 15-year-old, so taking them out to these places where we can come together and see great art and talk as a family, and then usually run around outside a little bit is really rejuvenating.
I mean, I'm a pretty adventurous person. I can't think of any place in particular in Dallas. I mean, I love being here at the theater. I love my job. I love walking in this space and knowing that we have complete autonomy to do what we want to do. It's a happy place for me. I do love to travel, and I'm excited about that. I'm excited about getting back to experiencing new places, new things, new adventures. So I will also say that, I really like supporting, I often frequent Jubilee Theater in Fort Worth. I frequent a lot of Dallas Black Dance Theater performances here in the area. I love arts and culture, so there's no one particular place for me in Dallas. I just like new adventures.
And then I will also say there's a group and it's the Texas Art Administrators and Educators of Color. And we started as a Facebook group. Jessica and I kind of co-founded that group back in May due to the racial reckoning, right? And everything that was happening. And because we felt the need to have a group of people where we can come together and share experiences and create courageous spaces to kind of share what we're going through and our struggles. So we did that as well. And that's been one of the best resources just for camaraderie and healing and self-care, because we come together and we share what we're going through as a collective, as a whole. And I think those spaces are necessary as well. So that's kind of another suggestion I would always make, is find the people you can talk to freely without judgment, that you can trust, to just say what's going on and what's happening and what you're needing.
I agree. Can you say the name of that group again, Marta?
The Texas Art Administrators and Educators of Color.
Find us on Facebook.
Okay.
And we just got an Instagram recently, but we are working on, as Marta said, creating, community spaces, virtual spaces to come together to talk, but also creating and sharing resources as well. So the more the merrier.
So I'm a member of an organization called It's Lonely at the Top. And we often have peer-to-peer, it's a structured agenda. But at the end of that meeting, we have kind of a peer-to-peer mentorship. And that's, quite frankly, the most exciting part of that meeting for me. But I'm very interested in this Facebook group. I'm going to look you up.
Thank you for sharing that. That also sort of leads me into my final question that I had, which was, what are you working on right now that we can support from TRHT, that the people watching and in our community? What events you have planned? What needs does your community have that we can support? As you're ready to share, just jump in and let us know how to follow you and support everything you're doing.
I'll start. So I mentioned that we're not a traditional theater, we're community-based theater practitioners. And so if you haven't had the vaccine yet, please come by Bishop Arts Theater Center on June 1st from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. We are partnering with the Mayor's Office and the CARES Foundation of Texas to vaccinate as many people as possible. We are starting in-person programming in October with a performance, a jazz concert. And so all of that information is also up on our website. But one of the other things that we're doing is we've really leaned into podcast plays, and we're doing a show called What If to commemorate the death of George Floyd on May 27th through the 30th. So again, if you will visit our website at bishopartstheater.org. It's written by a incredible playwright out of New York. It also stars Tanya Pinkins, who's a filmmaker, veteran, Tony Award-winning actress, as well as Dallas's own Morgan Calhoun.
I can share next. So for me right now, since I'm not directly affiliated with an organization, one of the things that I am doing to support museum educators and to support the field is this kind of research, right? Like I'm doing research, I'm trying to get articles published and share some of the things that I have found. So next month, the Journal of Museum Education, June article, June, I can't think of what the issue. I'm going to have an article in that issue. So check that out. Journal of Museum Education, you can find it online. And then in October, I have a book chapter that I wrote that's being published in a book about K through 12 experiences in museums. And if possible, maybe I can share those links directly in the YouTube chat or comment section. So those are things that I'm working on, and I'm starting to kind of gather interest from other museums who want to be involved in the next round of kind of research that I'm doing. So.
Not published yet, but also doing research, more related to kind of autoethnographic research about racism and kind of racial identity. So hopefully that will be something coming out soon. And again, I just wanted to highlight, like, Artes de la Rosa is having their Dia de los Niños y Libros Carnaval, and they're going to be having some art kits this, I think, from the Amen Carter this coming at the end of the month. So if you want to create art with them, I think that would be a really great experience. And I did a segment with them. They still have some art kits left. So if you wanted to play with some clay, we have the recording up and you can do the activity with us.
So cool. Thank you all so much for being here. I am actually going to let Marta close us out because this panel was really her brainchild, and I want to make sure if she has any last words before we sign off that she has a chance to say them.
No, I just really want to thank each and every one of you for coming, being here with us today and coming into this courageous space. I know speaking about our experiences and what we've learned throughout the years in our different careers and our perspectives is important. And I'm hopeful that what we shared here today will help other art administrators and museum educators or people who are working in cultural institutions to kind of see that people are doing the work. There's like-minded people out here, that they're not kind of talking into the void, that, you know, we are facilitating and helping to create change, and we're taking ownership over it and kind of creating those transformational changes. So I just want to thank all of you again so much for taking the time to be here today with Stephanie and I and DTRHT. We're so grateful to have hosted you, hear your voices. I'm so excited to see all your research and read. Teresa, I read your articles already and we shared them on the YouTube comments because they were so amazing and informative. Jessica, I'm looking forward to just reading your your article in the journal and reading your book chapter in October. Asami, research mode, I'm in it as well, doing my dissertation based on linguistic diversity in museum education and museum educational programs. So I feel you. We're all here doing the work, and it's important and to be in these stages. So thank you so much again.
And thank you to everyone who has joined us for this event. If you are not following us already on social media, we are at DallasTRHT, and our website is dallastrht.org. If you'd like to join the conversation, we follow the hashtag HowWeHeal, and make sure that you join our email list and sign up and subscribe so you can get notified when we have more Transformation Tuesdays. Also, because Transformation Tuesday is community driven, we want to know what you want to talk about, who you want to hear from in Dallas. So be sure to email us or leave us comments on, what topics we should cover next: race, racism, and blank in Dallas. Thanks again for joining us, and